Hello, this video is going to show you how to automate your Python documentation using Sphinx. Okay, so I've got a fairly basic Python project here, which is inside this directory. I've got some HW, LW, MC, MW files, modules with functions inside, which have doc strings. Now, if I modify one of these doc strings, a person who the message will be from, if I bring up my activity bar, I will then see that something has changed. And then I can click on that and I can commit it, and I'll get prompted to update the commit message. Then click the tick, sync the changes. This is now committing it to GitHub. And if we go and look at what I've got here, this is the repo. Jubilant Lamp just happens to be the name that GitHub created for me. You come across here, see the little brown dot. If I click on that, you can see your progress, the details, and what it is doing is it is processing with the workflow which I've created, which I will show you next. So all of that's completed. It's built the documentation. Go back. And now if we check deployment, so two stages, there's the building of the Sphinx docs and then there's the deployment. The deployment is where the HTML pages get moved across to GitHub pages. Click on that, and we get the progress. We can see the report build status. That's gone green with a tick, and deploying to GitHub pages. And that's now complete. You click on the link, and then if we go to, let me just try and remember what was it? It was HW. So if we go into HW module, which is listed here under the contents, and name of person who from, or refresh, you see how suddenly the A appeared. So I made a change to my code locally. I submitted it, committed it to GitHub. GitHub took the workflow which I have created the Sphinx documentation, and then it moved it across to GitHub pages. So that's the demo of what we are going to be looking at in more detail. So without further ado, let's do that. Okay, so the Sphinx YAML file. This is what I've slightly modified based on an example which I found on the internet, and I don't know if I've put credit for it here, but I've put the credit for it on my website, redandgreen.co.uk. And what it does is it creates a Ubuntu on line 21. It spins up a Ubuntu VM on the GitHub end. So GitHub spin up a Ubuntu latest image. Then it runs an action, sets up Python 3.10. That's just left in there from testing. It installs the dependencies. So depending on what you have in your project, so in my project, in my requirements.txt, I've just added PyTest. But obviously if you're using requests, you'd add requests there and so on and so on. PHP import is actually a very useful thing to have, because what it does, it basically gives you a one-liner, which right at the very end, it imports your HTML files, which are in this path, docs /_ build /HTML, and GHP import does that for you. That you will see some examples potentially on GitHub, which are about 4 lines long and a bit more fiddly because you have to then start working out the paths, etc. So talking of paths, the other place where setting the paths is very important is in the index file, so when you start your project, you'll create a docs folder. when you run Sphinx, it will populate that docs folder with these files, or most of them. There is an index.rst file. The index.rst file needs to have modules added. And then modules is another file which then contains the names of each of your Python files, but without the .py file extension. Now, I've shown you modules, I've shown you index. Both of those get created effectively. They get created by Sphinx. Conf.py file is also created by Sphinx when you run it. But you need, when you do Sphinx quick start, it will create you a conf.py file. But it won't have these 3 lines. And it won't reference the nice theme that we want to use. So we will need to do pip install Sphinx _rtd theme. We need to add these, especially autodoc. We set up our project information here. One thing to notice is here I've used /JL, and my code is inside my project. It's called JL, but then I create a folder called JL, which actually holds all of my Python files. So dot is your top directory, and then /JL. So if your source code, your Python files, are in a directory called src, then you would do /src. If all of this is sounding a little bit complicated, go to my website, redandgreen.co.uk. I've done 2 articles. The first article was basically Sphinx, how to document a Python project, which shows you pip install Sphinx, Sphinx _rtd _theme. Then, provided you've created a docs folder, then you change to the docs folder. If you haven't created it, then you need to create it. Then you do Sphinx quick start. Sphinx quick start makes most of the files, the RST files and the index RST file. But as I say, once it's made those files, you will need to just come in to directory where they all live, and you will need to just add that and add the theme. You can choose a different theme if you wish, up to you. So yeah, it's all documented. redandgreen.co.uk/Sphinx with the commands. Also, the other article which completes the project will be this article, which actually tells you how you use workflow. So there's just a recap telling you how to modify the index file. So modules RST, you add the names of your Python files, and then the index RST, just add modules. So index looks at modules, and then modules looks at modules.rst. So if you come to this page, this actually, you can copy and paste all of this, and this will provide you with the basis for your GitHub action, or your GitHub workflow, which contains some GitHub actions. So what's a GitHub action? A GitHub action is some ready-made code. I think it involves spins up a Docker container. So actions checkout version 2, actions setup Python, and the other action is, I think, GHP import references or calls an action. Not sure about that, but it works. So once you've done all that, you will then need to set up within your repo. You'll need to set it up. Your repo, go to settings, GitHub pages, and then you'll just need to allow. You'll need to allow GitHub workflow to access GitHub pages. And I've put the details in this article, so it's all in here. So read write permissions on the workflow. You'll get an error if you don't do that. You need to give right permission basically to the workflow. Yeah, and that's just, there's a couple of gotchas which I've listed. So one of them was where you need to update the path in the conf.py file. So the best way to learn this is just to run it. It'll probably fail the first time because you've got directories in the wrong place. But I've done a tree. So I've used tree, and I've tried to show you here in this article where you need to put your files. So best thing to do probably is buy me a coffee and then clone my repo, and then you can see it. Or so if you clone my repo, provided you follow the additional steps to set up GitHub pages, which my code won't do for you because it will be your repo. Just remember also to click on the cog. So on the far right hand side, you've got that cog, haven't you? Let me just show you on the main thing. So within your repo, you've got the cog. Click on the cog, and then you just need to tick use your GitHub pages website. You're basically telling the repo that you want to also additionally use GitHub pages. So also to set up most of the other bits, you need to go to settings, and you need to go to pages. And this was one of the things which caught me out, and I spent quite a long time making mistakes here. But what you need to do is say deploy from branch. The other option is to use GitHub Actions. I'm not doing that. Deploy from branch. Then if you click there, you'll see your other branches, but HTML will live in a directory called, in a repo which gets created by your workflow, and that's called gh-pages. So gh-pages is created by by the workflow. And again, it's all here. So it all gets passed from your local laptop where you write your code. So this will get, if I change it here, this will get committed. And when it gets committed, it will update the repo. And then the repo will know that the YAML file's changed. And when it calls it, when you do the upload, because you've set up the workflow, this will run. And yeah. Talk about, the import. So the import, this creates you a new, this bit here creates you a new repo. Not a new repo, a new branch, sorry. And that new branch, GHP pages, is that branch there. So before you run before you commit, you'll just have probably main or master. After you run the commit, you'll get GH pages. From GH pages, you need to choose root, not docs. Because if you look at your repo, let's go into, I don't need to do that. When you go to here, and you'll see, let's go to GH pages, and there we go. So it's the root. The index file is in the root. So let's just do a recap on this. Sphinx to GitHub pages via GitHub Actions. Create documentation in Python with Sphinx. Now, you can do that. Best thing to do is to run Sphinx locally the first time, because that will then create you your conf.py. You need to modify that locally and then commit it. So run Sphinx quick start. Go back to the other article. So Sphinx quick start. Edit the conf file, the conf.py file. Once you've done that, you can then run, and this is the bit that generates the documentation with your Python code. And also there you will see I've done src. That is generic. So when I ran it for my project, I put in JL because JL is the name of the directory where I have my code. So this directory here. So whatever that's called. So your project is called JL or whatever. Then your source code, if you want SRC, you can have SRC there. If you've got SRC there, then that's what you need to put here. Then that generates the documentation that you will then see ultimately when you get through to here, which is your successful documentation, which here you can see I've viewed it locally. So you can see the code locally. And if you only want to host it locally and you don't want to deploy it to GitHub pages, then that's fine. We can go into, where do we go? We need to go into docs, _build, HTML, and index HTML. So if I I'll open it, Firefox. And you see it's opening locally, file, : //. And Firefox is a pop-up, which I didn't really want to see, but there we go. So that that's an older version. So that's only got 2 modules, which is because it's old documentation and it's not been updated. The documentation that you see online is actually newer, and build HTML. These, if you make a mistake, the best thing to do is to delete your entire docs folder and recreate it. So everything contained in docs is kind of recreatable. Might be worth making a copy of your conf.py file though. So make a copy of your conf.py file, keep it somewhere, and then delete all of docs. So if I run, go see, make HTML, you can see it running. And if I go into HTML now, preview browser. Now I've rerun it, you can see it's built me the latest full complement of files, HWMW. So long wave, medium wave. I don't know. So tests as well. So it's quite common to need to document your tests. So somebody might want to see what you're testing. So also you can include the Sphinx documentation on read docs, on GitHub pages, wherever you need, or just locally. And there we go. So this was the command which generated it all, and that was just make HTML. Typically, when you first run it, you may get errors and you'll get some red writing here, but this is now running successfully. Most of the problems you'll get will be with having directories in incorrect places or in the wrong place. And typically, you'll just need to put ... or a / and just... So the way to think about that is how you would navigate if you were just going to be doing CD, change directory. So if I was at this level, where my files are, how would I navigate up to here and then down to there? And also, one little tip is if you drag that file, so test LW, if I drag that, drag it across, hold down Shift, and release it, it's actually filled in the path for you. Just do that. So it's done JL / tests / So that's kind of given you the relative path that you can try. So that's noticed it's done 10 changes. So I don't... Oh, it's noticed that all of the right? That's actually not entirely necessary now, because what is noticed is that the HTML files have changed locally. But when I commit that, it will obviously commit those to GitHub, but it recreates those using the action. I'll do it anyway, but it doesn't actually need to send those. See, 24 minutes ago, that was when I started doing this video. And now if we do a refresh, that is my branch for pages. So we need to go back to master. And there we see the brown dot. So it's just running again. It's doing the checks. Successful. So it's done the build. Now it'll be doing the deploy pages build deployment. This is fairly quick. I know some articles mention that it can take up to 10 minutes to update. I have had that before when I was making a static HTML page for another repo. But this, I don't know if it's cached, but it does seem to be quite quick. Usually. So deploy, there we go. So 5 seconds, 2 seconds, 9 seconds, total duration 35 seconds. Obviously it's quite a small project, but there we go. And then we go, and then we've got the same files that we saw before. So any questions, check out my articles, 2 articles. So I've got a Python code. It's Sphinx to GitHub pages via GitHub Actions, and Sphinx how to document a Python project. So this is the first one that you'll need to follow. Remember to use Sphinx-API doc -o and tell it where the docs folder is, and then tell it where your source files are. Remember to modify your index file. Remember to modify your modules file. Make HTML. So GitHub Actions are not just for this use, not just for GitHub pages. So GitHub workflows. If you don't actually have any actions or workflows set up, click up here, so actions. And you want to do a new workflow. And then you can search GitHub for lots of ready-made actions. So if you wanted to, for instance, if you wanted to publish a Python package, click on that, and it will bring you in the YAML file, which is needed to do that. It will need some modification. You'll need to come in and modify the Python version, for instance. It's all documented there. So this workflow will upload a Python package using Twine when a release is created. The whole idea of all of this is continuous deployment. There's a couple of articles on my repo here as well. That's the tip about enabling GitHub pages. That's about modifying the workflow missions. That's a note about doing git remote add origin. So you clone this repo, you will then need to do git remote add origin, because you will then want to use this repo, but you don't want to push it back up to where you cloned it from. You will want to modify it and then push it up to your new repo. Workflow action uses pip install ghp-import. So if that changes or breaks, then act accordingly. Full article, and there's a link to the article on my website. So hopefully I've showed you that you can, with the aid of this long YAML file, really the most important bit is the PHP import. You can copy this exactly, and if you do a standard directory structure with docs, and you take the defaults when you run Sphinx quick start, just accept the defaults, press enter. The HTML gets built in a directory called _build/HTML. So if you don't change any of the defaults when you run Sphinx quick start, this YAML file will work for you. And happy days. So thank you for watching, and any questions, drop me a comment, and feel free to clone my repo. So it's red and green.